My guest today is award-winning Quebec filmmaker Pier-Philippe Chevigny and his powerful Oscar-qualified short film, Mercenaire. Now, he is known for his gripping cinematic style, blending suspense, urgent social commentary, and a strong anti-animal cruelty stance, and continues to assert himself as one of Canada's most compelling contemporary voices. Now, his Oscar-qualified short, Mercenaire, premiered at Toronto International Film Festival, went on to win the Special Jury Award at their prestigious Clermont-Ferrand International Short Film Festival, and has already been selected for over 75 festivals and won 13 prestigious awards. Now, Mercenaire is about an ex-con hired by a pig slaughterhouse through a social reintegration program, and he desperately tries to find another job while repressing his inner violence. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome filmmaker Pier-Philippe Chevigny and his powerful short film, Mercenaire, to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you have one of the most original stories this year in the Best Live Action Short category. What was the inspiration for the film?
So, actually, the original idea for the film is by the lead actor himself in the film, Marc-Andre Grondin. You might know him from the movie called Crazy by Jean-Marc Vallée that came out in the early 2000s. He was the lead actor in that. And since then, he's been like pretty much a star in Quebec cinema. And because I did a feature film before that, and Marc-Andre starred in it. And while we were prepping for that film, he told me about something that he had learned doing another film that was shot in a slaughterhouse, and he realized that all the employees were working there were actually ex-convicts, which, as it turns out, is quite happens quite a lot in Quebec specifically. And so when he told me about that, I asked him, "Hey, do you mind if I steal this wonderful idea? I'd like to make a film about that, and maybe you could star in it." And we started talking like that because I happen to have a lot of childhood friends who ended up having trouble with the law, with crime, eventually doing prison time, and I've never like found quite the right angle to make a film about an ex-convict trying to re-enter society. I wanted to make a film about basically an ex-convict who comes out of prison and he has no one except the audience. And we put the viewer basically in the shoes of someone who's there for moral support, who's going to be, the only one rooting for him. And so that was basically the idea. And then there's another part of the whole story is making research on the slaughterhouse industry, which I was not familiar with. And that was also very traumatic and eye-opening for me. And the one thing that made me realize I had something strong enough to write a film about this was finding out that in some slaughterhouse, animals will sometimes wake up on the production line when they're supposed to be out, when they're supposed to be passed out. And I've spoken to at least two people who witness kind of very traumatic events like that. I've seen the animal in a state of shock and suffering, and that's when I knew, okay, I have everything I need to write this story.
Yeah, you did, and you covered all of that. But paralleling a former convict who was recently released from prison after committing a murder with a setting of a slaughterhouse, that was pure genius. And
Yeah, all credit to Marc-Andre because he's the one who had the dramatic irony of that, of having like an ex-convict who supposed to be cured of his own violence, and after spending so much time in prison, and then he comes out and society says, "No, wait a minute, your violence could actually be useful in the slaughterhouse industry." That's very powerful, I think.
yeah, and it really it contradicts um, being reformed in prison, and then you put them in a situation where makes no sense at all, and you really
Yeah.
show this. It becomes a very deep human and emotional story, and of course there's many contradictions within this whole story, which makes it so compelling. So what is the reinsertion programs in Quebec, and what do they have to offer to those released from prison? Are they helpful, or in the case that you show, actually hurtful to their return to society?
So in the script, like there's part of it is fictional. There are no like reinsertion programs that are specifically like dedicated to sending ex-convicts works in slaughterhouse. It just so happens that slaughterhouse in real life will hire ex-convicts because they have trouble finding workforce elsewhere. And it's one of the few industry where if you have a history of violence, they don't really mind. And so, yeah, basically, there's no actual reinsertion program. The only thing is that if you come out of prison, a lot of time conditions of your parole will be to show that you can manage to keep a job. If you can keep a job, that means you're ready to reenter society. And I think that's pretty much the same in the US. Usually, when people come out, they are expected to be able to maintain a job. And so in the case of this character, the only job he can find is in a slaughterhouse, which is like the last place he would rather be. And so yeah, that was it.
Yeah, because this lead character David, I mean, he represents many men who have been released from prison and desire. And see, this is the thing I love about your lead character. He desires to be accepted in the society that only sees him for his past crime.
Exactly. Which I think is fairly common. I think there's got to be a few criminals that, have mental health issues, are psychopaths or whatever. It can never be rehabilitated, but that's like a slight minority. I think the vast majority of people who commit crimes do so not because they are evil or that they are defined by violence, but because of external circumstances like economic reasons that force them to act that way. And so most ex-convicts don't want to spend the rest of their life in the crime world. They're usually stuck because it's very hard to escape your social class when you come from the very bottom, which was the case of my childhood friends. They were actually very, very sweet kids that we used to hang around with. And just at some point, because of financial necessity, they ended up like turning themselves towards, crime and selling drugs and stuff like that. But I think the vast majority of ex-convicts are not violent.
Yeah, and the problem is they end up when they get out, depending on the crime, you know, and especially in the beginning of getting out, they're really in society wearing the scarlet letter, and
Hmm.
and only does their consistency to prove to society that they have changed slowly removes that scarlet letter over time. And of course, it could take 5 years, it could take 10 years, but it always comes down to consistency. And in this film, it really kind of shows a major contradiction is that the justice system claims to rehabilitate inmates, but then again, like we just said, places them in jobs that in all reality just reminds them of their crime, which you do show this particular scene. And overall, with the lead character David, you subconsciously show us the audience and you place us within his struggling mindset, correct?
Absolutely. Like every visual decision that we made was to make sure that the audience felt like they were as close as possible to this character. Like we follow him from behind, just like we would in reality if we were physically present with him, or just we're right behind him. So we see everything through his eyes, and we feel like we're almost like we're here for moral support. Basically, we're right behind him. There's many shots that are shot from just above his shoulder. It feels like you could almost reach out, put your hand on his back and tell him and everything's going to be okay. It's kind of the film is almost about trying to link your own responsibility towards him. Like you have a role also as an audience member in this.
Yeah, there's a scene uh, that I really liked, and it's really kind of a quiet scene. But when I was watching it, it's where David was walking down the sidewalk with the camera to his back, and he was passing by the construction van, so he noticed that his friend was across the street. And I was thinking, How does someone like David effectively make the transition into freedom, but with society still holding him within his imaginary cell? And in a way, his friend did that.
Exactly. Well, I think those two characters show a truth is that a lot of times what will make the difference for an ex-convict being able to re-enter society is whether or not he has like friends and family on the outside that can help him re-enter society. And taking example from my own friends, like they were lucky enough to have family, they had friends, and that whole situation in the film that's depicted, where one ex-convict tries to like convince his friend who has a job in construction to hire him. That was inspired by two friends of mine, which in reality was a much happier ending because like they helped each other out because one of them had friends and family with ties to the construction industry, and so that's the difference. But the vast majority of people who come out, because of certain amount of issues, substance abuse and everything, family tends to be cut down while they're in prison, and so that's the whole difference. For David, David has no one, yeah, so he's on his own.
Yeah, and you kind of give us the feeling that he literally has no one. You really
Mhm.
isolated his character, but you also show in this film two living things, humans and animals. And even today, many will do more to help animals than they'll help mankind, especially those who have been released from prison. So you really show this contrast in this film because even when I was because I'm an animal lover, so when I was watching the film, you know, I'm I was really glad that you didn't go all the way to show us with
Mhm.
the stun gun, but you gave us enough to realize what was going on, what was happening, and and then that's when you said earlier, there's that scene where the hog wasn't fully knocked out. And for David, it was a remembrance of his past crime, something that he was trying to forget and overcome. But then you throw in this character named Kevin, who
Mhm.
literally throws his past or David's past, his past crime in his face. And that was a real ugly scene.
Hmm. Yeah, basically the film is about this character who tries to, contain his anger and his violence, and it's basically one small climax leading up to that final confrontation. Uh, yeah, and the parallel between animal and the ex-convict in there. Also, I think one thing that I wanted to point out with that symbolism is that uh, within that system, David is obviously he's the slaughterer, so he's complicit, but he's also a victim himself, and that's what the parallel is supposed to mean. Is that I kind of see the meat industry and capitalism as being a chain of exploitation, and everybody within that chain from the bottom to the top, they're both victim and complicit, except the ones at the very bottom, the animals, and the ones at the very top, like the companies that make profit. But everyone in between uh, has basically two hats, two roles, and that's the case of David, who's obviously like complicit with the system, but he's also very much trapped, just like an animal within that system. And
Well,
so that was basically the idea of the opening scene. We start from the bottom and we go up one notch. That's how we meet the character of David.
yeah, when David yelled at Kevin to use the stunner, which Kevin knew very well what he should have done, but it was at that moment that I noticed that David shows that he truly has compassion in his heart for the life of others, even though his
Mhm.
crime was the one that took the life of another. And of course, with all ex-cons, and of course, if it's beyond drug possession or robbery, but if they were in prison because they murdered somebody, there's always going to be that possibility someone's going to find out. And then you end up with the Kevin in one's life that kind of throws it up in your face. And you brought that with full force. But when I
Hmm.
looked at that scene in that instant, it proves that there are people who can be remorseful, they can seek forgiveness, they desire to change, and that scene just hit me so hard in the heart. I mean,
Hmm.
it was beautifully done.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and it's ironic because in a way he expresses empathy and for the animal that suffered, but he does so by being very violent with this other guy, you know. There's kind of irony like that. It's kind of supposed to mean that if once you come within the cycle of violence, it's very hard to escape from it, which I think is part of reality. If it's very hard to, you know, escape from your position in society. Um, but yeah, and also we, you know, you've kind of alluded to it, but we reveal at this moment that David probably committed murder. It's never said explicitly. We
Right.
don't really know. And to me, there was a reason to keep that under wraps. It's simply that I didn't feel like you needed to know that much because you understood from the way David behaved and how he reacted that he's not fundamentally an evil person. You know, he's not violent. He doesn't revel in violence. He doesn't enjoy the suffering. So even though he committed murder, you can kind of guess that, you know, that error, that mistake he made in his childhood probably does not define who he is, and he's trying, you know, his best to be the best version of himself.
Yeah, and see that was the pain in that scene because with with the interaction between David and Kevin, the thing that set him off was not the stun gun, it was what Kevin said to him.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, if I was David, I would have done the exact same thing. But in
Hmm.
David's case, what made it so bad is here you are trying to prove everybody around you that you've changed and you're working hard, and you get some stupid person like Kevin that
Hmm.
pulls the trigger, an emotional
Hmm.
trigger, and then, and I could imagine, you know, when David did that, he's thinking, great, now nobody here thinks that I've changed. And now
Hmm.
you,
Exactly.
so, and then what happens is it's like I said, people like that, they have to walk a higher road. They have to be so consistent. But if there is one little mess up, it's literally wiping away all the work that you've done and you're back to square one again.
Exactly, and it's kind of suggested earlier on that you know, if he screws up any step of the way, he might return to prison. So that's, we don't really know what's going to happen after the scene, but there's, you know, enough hints that may probably he's going to have to go back to prison for that mistake that he did. But like you said, I think we feel that it would be very hard in David's position to act any other way than he did because the context, you know, pushes him towards that direction, and it's just very human to be angry at the one guy who's being so cruel.
Well, yeah, and also too, you know, when I looked at it, part of me was like, "Oh, are they going to send him back for that, or is anybody standing there that will vouch for David and say, look, this wasn't his fault, that was Kevin's fault," you know, and put the blame on the guy that pulled the emotional trigger. So part of me was like, hopefully somebody will step up because they saw what happened. So it wasn't David's fault.
Yeah, we can hope so. And you know, the fact that the film doesn't tell you, you're very much free to interpret it and hope for the best for David, but who knows?
Yeah, well, do you think your film will help people have compassion for those who have paid for their crimes to truly give them a second chance in society?
I mean, I that's definitely like the big takeaway of if there's one idea the film tries to drive through is that, you know, you're not defined by whatever actions you pause, or at least the vast majority of us are not defined by our mistakes. Then again, I don't know what is like the actual reach that a short film like that could have to change mentality. But every time there's a screening and we have discussion, I see that people do get that this idea. So hopefully, yes, hopefully to the people who end up seeing it, it makes a difference.
Well, hopefully too that maybe there's business owners out there that would be open to hire, ex-cons to put them in a better job situation that
Hmm.
doesn't mirror their past crime.
Yeah, that would be the best. Also, also understand business owners because it's very hard to trust people, but yeah, hopefully we just move forward with more compassion.
Well, now, did you frame your film in 4:3 to cause the audience to feel confined along with David?
So actually, the film is not in 4:3; it's in 1:1. So it's a perfect square, and that originally came from ethical reasons because when we thought we were going to be shooting in an actual slaughterhouse, I wanted to make sure that we saw as little as possible of the blood and the gore and the violence. And so one of the idea that we had was have the tightest frame that we could so that we basically excluded the background, in it, and in doing so, it focuses your attention completely on the lead character, which is also something I wanted. I wanted like to the audience to pay attention to this character and relate to him and have empathy for him. But then it also created an effect of feeling trapped within the frame, and I think it does contribute a lot to the anxiety that you feel while watching the film. And basically it's the story of a guy who comes out of prison and who realizes he's still trapped, and he's actually trapped within the frame.
So you actually filmed in a real slaughterhouse.
We did film in a real slaughterhouse, but it was a slaughterhouse that was decommissioned for 6 years. So there were no animals being slaughtered. It didn't even smell like it was just basically an empty box with the tools and all of the materials that they use, but they hadn't been able to use it at all for 6 years because they couldn't find anyone that would work in their slaughterhouse. So we just offered them like a few $100s to rent the place for a weekend, and they were just very happy to be able to make some money off of it. But yeah.
So, well, then that tells me you have one incredible sound mixer.
Yes, yes, but we were in a real slaughterhouse, but there were, the film is very oppressive and there's a lot of layers of noise and everything, but that was all created in post because there was nothing going on. It was basically just an empty space with no ventilation. But slaughterhouse are like any industrial plants, they're really, really noisy. So yeah, we had to build and reconstruct that in post-production because it was actually very quiet when we were shooting. And we had like to have the actors speak very loud, like pretend there was ventilation, but it was quiet.
Oh, wow. So how many pigs did you have to bring in for the shoot?
I think we brought about 12. So the pigs, by the way, like obviously no animals were harmed in the making of this film.
Yeah.
Uh, we used an animal wrangler, and she was working with this family of pigs who were actually domesticated pigs. They're in that sense the film is not super realistic because they're not the kinds of like the big pink swines that you'd see in slaughterhouse. They're domesticated pig. They're a bit smaller. They have fur. So it wasn't 100% realistic, but we felt it was the right ethical decision because those were animals that were never going to get slaughtered and wouldn't have to like suffer through that trauma. And also, they were animals that had been in movies before, so they were used to having cameras around them. So it was like just a perfect deal. And yeah, it was great working with the pigs actually because they're very, very smart. And we didn't have as much time as we wanted, but they did train with them, especially the pig that we use in the opening scene. the first pig that gets dragged inside the slaughterhouse, we wanted him like to be nervous and be kind of fight off. He was trained to react that way. And then the pig at the end, the very last thing, we wanted it to be like super calm and very still. And he was also trained for that. Anytime they would perform well, they would get a reward. They would get a banana. And so that was really, really cute. And the entire cast and crew really loved the pigs.
So what about the pig that was hanging upside down?
That's a dummy.
Oh, I was hoping.
Yeah, yeah. We had a special effect artist, build a dummy for us.
Well, you made everything look absolutely real. It added to the tension to the whole film. Of course, I know that every animal lover that was sitting in any theater watching this was
Mhm.
really having to go through their own little tense situation with all of that. But when it comes to all of the audiences that have seen this film, what are some of the questions you get asked about it?
Well, certainly, like the comfort of the animals was on a lot of people's minds. And when we first began showing the film around, those were questions. A lot of people, especially those who weren't necessarily familiar with how movies are made, some people thought we were slaughtering pigs for real and everything. And I started asking presenters at festivals to just have a little disclaimer. There's this film with animals, but no animals were harmed, and just to let the audience know that this all make believe, and don't be angry at me. We did everything like we were supposed to be doing and to make sure that the animals were okay. But a lot of the questions from the audience were about the aesthetic choices that we made, the why the ratio, why shooting from over his shoulder, and they wanted to know because the film has kind of a very distinct visual style, and that was very deliberate. And people often wanted to know why we made those choices. I think that was the most frequently asked questions.
Well, it makes a whole lot of sense because when I first saw it, I was like, okay, there's a reason for the framing because framing can tell a story, and a lot of that
Oh
framing when
yeah,
it's narrow and tight like that, it means
yeah.
confinement, and you pull that off beautifully in this film. Now you're Oscar qualified, and you seem to be in very good hands with H2 64 distribution because I had interviewed Vincent Lorte about his film
Hmm.
Invincible, which was Oscar
Hmm.
nominated. But your writing is brilliant in this film as well as your directing.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, we'll see what happens with the whole Oscars thing. It's funny because this is a film that I made in between two features because I did a feature before and I'm working on another one, and it wasn't one that I was writing a lot of hope on. It's something we just did in between two projects, and also because like oftentimes short filmmakers they will make films to like just get funding for their future film project or as proof of concept. But I just did this short because I wanted to make a cool little film, and I wasn't afraid to take bold risks, especially in terms of visual ideas. And so I had no expectation, and it went pretty well so far. So we'll see. Whatever happens is cool.
So you're going to ask Vincent for any advice on how to handle the mindset of an Oscar campaign?
Actually, yeah, we we just spoke fairly recently, and yeah, I happen to know him very well. Actually, he just did another short that was on the festival circuit at the same time as mine, and so we got to hang out a lot and speak a lot about his whole experience. So we'll see. I mean,
Well,
yeah.
you've got a very, very powerful film here. And for you, what do you hope that the audience will take away from seeing it?
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, certainly the idea that you're not defined by your actions. I truly believe that because it's personal to me because I've witnessed it from very, very close friend who had a lot of troubles reentering society after getting out of prison. So I think that's the main idea. We are not defined by our mistakes, basically.
Amen to that. And ladies and gentlemen, Mercenaire follows David, a young man newly released from prison for a murder committed in murky circumstances. Now, despite, well, he's desperate for stability, he reluctantly accepts the only job available through a social reinsertion program working in a pig slaughterhouse line. Now, as he endures the cruelty inflicted on animals and the escalating aggression of his co-workers, David must resist the violent impulses he fears will define him forever. Now, in a workplace where killing is normalized, human and animal alike, the threat of losing his hard-won freedom grows dangerously close. Now, this Oscar qualified short, Mercenaire, is full of tension and drama, but this film goes much deeper than that. Mercenaire is about humanity and about second chances. Just because one is released from prison only means they are physically free. One's mindset and emotions are still caged because society hasn't changed their mindset as well. But Mercenaire is brilliantly written and directed. Each member of the cast brings top performances, and they are so good you may forget that they are actors and actually working in a slaughterhouse. Now, Mercenaire rightly deserves to be Oscar qualified and is aiming for the coveted shortlist, and it has all the elements of superb storytelling. And Pierre-Philippe, I want to thank you so much for sharing one of the most powerful short films of 2025 with me today.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It was actually very enjoyable. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, look, Mercenary is one of those films that, it's dramatic, it's tense, but it's also a life lesson. It should be a life lesson to all of us that we should give others second or maybe third chances and not just judge them from their past, but maybe be a helpful hand in helping to shape a much positive future. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel, and yes, you can listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Audible, and more. And remember, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.